All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You ready to jump back in time with me?
Always ready. Where are we headed today?
Well, today we're going back to May 24th, 1777. We're focusing on the Meigs Raid on Sag Harbor, New York. It's this fascinating little moment in the American Revolutionary War.
Sag Harbor. Okay, yeah. Interesting choice. Sounds like a bit of a departure from the big battles we usually cover.
Yeah, I mean, forget about those massive engagements for a second. What we're going to do in this deep dive is look at this uh, daring American operation in this sleepy colonial port. Why was it important? How did it actually go down? We're going to figure that out.
So we're digging into the specifics of this raid, but also trying to understand its significance in the bigger picture of the revolution.
Exactly. And we're going to be using a bunch of historical accounts, really piecing together the story to see how much of an impact this thing really had.
I like it. These smaller events can often be more revealing than the huge battles. You can really see the strategies, the individual stories, that kind of thing.
Right. And the back and forth that really defines war. Like you said, getting away from those big famous battles. This gives us a more, I don't know, a more authentic view of what was happening.
For sure. So, to get us started, maybe we should take a step back before Sag Harbor. What was the overall situation of the Revolutionary War looking like in early 1777?
Well, 1776 was a crazy year. Back and forth, back and forth. The British, they had a major win capturing New York City.
Right. Huge strategic gain for them.
Huge. But then Washington turns around and pulls off those surprise attacks in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Trenton and Princeton.
Oh, absolutely. Those are crucial. Turned the tide, at least for a bit. Really boosted morale for the Americans after some pretty rough losses.
Yeah, it was like a shot in the arm they needed. So going into 1777, things are a little more settled, at least geographically. The British are consolidating their hold on New York City and Long Island.
Makes sense. Secure your base, right?
Exactly. And on the American side, they're doing what they can to put the squeeze on. They're trying to establish, kind of an unofficial blockade on land around the city.
Basically contain the British as much as possible. So we've got this kind of stalemate developing in that region, and that's when things start to get interesting, right?
Right, because neither side is sitting still. The British, especially, they start launching these raiding expeditions in the spring of 1777.
And what was their goal with these raids? Were they just trying to be disruptive, or was there more to it?
I think a lot of it was about disruption. They wanted to throw a wrench in the Continental Army's plans, mess with their supplies and logistics, keep them off balance.
So basically hit-and-run tactics to weaken the Americans and prevent them from mounting any major offensives.
Yeah, exactly. And they had some success, too. In March, they raided Peekskill up in New York, nabbed some supplies, caused some chaos. It was a win for them.
And that probably made them think, hey, we can do this.
Right. So then, just a month later, in April, they go for an even bigger target, Danbury, Connecticut. And this is where things start to connect to the Meigs Raid.
Ah, okay. The Danbury Raid. Now, that one was a real blow for the Americans, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. That's bad. William Tryon, he was leading the British. And you know what's interesting about him?
Let me guess. He wasn't just some random British officer.
Nope. He was the former royal governor of New York. Imagine that.
Wow, that's got to sting a little extra. One of our own, turning against us.
Right. So anyway, he leads this force. They land in Fairfield, Connecticut, march inland to Danbury, and basically torch the place. Yeah. Huge amounts of supplies, food, ammunition, everything gone.
What a setback. And yeah, having a former governor leading the charge must have been a real psychological blow, too. Adds another layer to the conflict.
Totally. And the loss of all those supplies, it really hurt. Now, the Connecticut militia did try to fight back. They, mobilized, harassed the British on their way back to their ships. There was a skirmish at Ridgefield, actually.
So it wasn't a complete walkover for the British.
No, definitely not. But the damage was done. And that's where Brigadier General Samuel Holden Parsons comes in. He was in charge of Connecticut's defenses at the time.
And he's not about to let the Danbury raid go unanswered?
You got it. He's got to retaliate.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about the supplies.
Yeah.
It was about showing the British that they couldn't just push them around.
It's a matter of pride, of showing that they can hit back. And that's where Sag Harbor enters the picture.
Yep, Sag Harbor. It was a British-held port on Long Island. But why Sag Harbor specifically? What made it such a good target?
Good question. I mean, Long Island's a big place.
Right. Well, a couple things. First, the British had been in control there since the Battle of Long Island back in August 1776.
Right. So it's firmly in their hands.
Yeah. And they had built up some defenses on Meeting House Hill, earthworks, palisades, the whole 9 yards.
So not an easy target to just stroll into.
Not at all. But here's the key. Sag Harbor was super important for the British Navy. They were using Gardiner's Bay as an anchorage for their ships, and Sag Harbor was perfect for supplying those ships.
Aha. So by hitting Sag Harbor, they could really disrupt the British naval operations in the area.
Exactly. It wasn't just about taking back a little piece of land. It was about messing with their ability to control the water.
Smart. So what was the situation like at Sag Harbor when Parsons started planning this raid? What did intelligence tell them about the British forces there?
Well, they knew there was a British foraging expedition going on. Basically, they were out gathering supplies from the local area, food, timber, whatever they could get their hands on.
Makes sense. You got to keep your troops fed and supplied.
Yeah, so this foraging party had 12 smaller boats, probably crewed by about 40 men, and they were protected by this armed schooner, a small warship with 12 guns.
Okay, so not a massive force, but definitely not undefended.
Right. And on top of that, there was a garrison of about 70 Loyalist soldiers in the town itself, under the command of Captain James Raymond.
All right, so Parsons has his target. Who does he choose to lead this daring mission?
He picks Colonel Return Jonathan Meigs. Quite a name, huh?
Return Jonathan. That's a name you don't forget.
And the force he put together was pretty impressive. He managed to gather 234 men in New Haven, pulling from different regiments. Their initial plan was to row across Long Island Sound in 13 whaleboats.
Hold on, all the way across the Sound in open boats? That's a rough trip, even on a good day.
Oh, it was brutal. They set out on May 21st, and they had terrible weather, rough seas, the whole thing. They were also accompanied by a couple of armed sloops and one unarmed one. Those probably carried some extra men and supplies.
Okay, so at least they had some backup.
Yeah, but by the time they reached Southold, New York on May 23rd, they'd lost over 60 men. The conditions were just too harsh for some of them. Only 170 made it across.
Wow, so even before the raid, they'd already taken a hit.
Yeah, attrition is a real thing, even without any fighting. But once they were on Long Island, Meigs got some crucial intel. The main British force in the area had an order to march towards New York City.
That's a lucky break.
Huge break. Suddenly, the Loyalist force at Sag Harbor was much more vulnerable. So Meigs makes a bold decision. He has his men carry 11 of their whaleboats across the North Fork of Long Island over to Peconic Bay.
Wait, they carried the boats. That's crazy.
Right, I know. It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But they did it. Then 130 men pile into the boats, and they set off across the bay towards Sag Harbor. This is all happening at night, by the way.
Wow, a nighttime raid. That takes guts.
Oh, yeah. They landed about 4 miles from Sag Harbor, then marched the rest of the way, arriving around 2 a.m. on May 24th.
Talk about a surprise attack. They really went all in on the element of surprise.
No kidding. So they're there. It's the middle of the night. What's Meigs' plan? How do you attack a defended position like that?
I'm guessing it's not a frontal assault.
Nope. He divides his force into 2 groups. One group, they're going for the earthworks on Meeting House Hill. Remember those?
Yeah, the main defenses.
Right. They're going in silent, bayonets fixed. No messing around. The other group, they're heading straight for the harbor to burn the boats and grab whatever supplies they can.
Smart. A two-pronged attack, hitting them where it hurts.
And it works like a charm. The group attacking the earthworks, they were so stealthy that they barely made a sound. Seriously, some accounts say only 1 shot was fired during that whole assault.
That's incredible. They must have been like ninjas.
Right. And while that was happening, the other group was down at the harbor setting fire to those 12 British boats. The schooner, the armed one, it did start firing on them.
So they did run into some resistance.
Yeah, but those smaller boats, the ones they were really after, those were all destroyed. Now, the sources are a little unclear about what happened to the schooner itself. It might have been destroyed, maybe captured, maybe it just got away. We don't know for sure.
Interesting. But even without knowing about the schooner, the raid was still a huge success, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, they achieved all their main objectives. Those small boats, they were crucial for the British foraging and resupply efforts. And then there were the prisoners. They captured 53 at the earthworks and another 37 down at the wharf.
That's a lot of prisoners, almost 100 in total.
Yep, 90 to be exact. And get this, the Americans didn't lose a single man, not one casualty. The British, they had 6 killed.
Wow, talk about a decisive victory. But then they had to march all those prisoners back to Connecticut. That must have been a logistical nightmare.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
But they did it. But, the story doesn't end there. This raid, it had ripple effects, especially for the Loyalists on Long Island.
Ah, right. I remember reading about that. There was retaliation, wasn't there?
Yeah, a couple of years later, in 1779, a group of Loyalists crossed the Sound and captured General Gold Selleck Silliman. He was a Connecticut militia general, and they snatched him right from his home.
Wow, talk about payback. It really shows how personal this conflict could get.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the Patriots, they retaliated in turn. They captured a judge on Long Island and eventually exchanged him for Silliman. It was this back and forth, an eye for an eye.
So the Meigs Raid sparked a whole chain of events. It wasn't just a one-off incident.
Exactly. And Parsons, he actually tried another raid across the Sound later that year, aiming for Setauket. But that one didn't go so well.
So Sag Harbor was his shining moment.
Yeah, pretty much. And,
Okay.
the Continental Congress, they recognized the importance of the Meigs Raid. They gave Colonel Meigs a special sword, one of those fancy ceremonial ones.
A nice gesture, a way of saying, well done, soldier.
Right. And later on, they even put up a monument at Sag Harbor to commemorate the raid. It was placed near the old burial ground, which, by the way, saw some fighting during the raid itself.
So it's a site that still resonates with history today.
It really does. And when you think about it, the Meigs Raid, it's a perfect example of how these smaller actions fit into the bigger picture of the Revolutionary War.
I mean, we tend to focus on the big battles, the turning points, but these smaller raids, they were happening all the time.
Yeah, they were a constant part of the war, and they could have a real impact, especially on morale and logistics.
Like you said earlier, it gives us a more nuanced view of the conflict. It wasn't just armies clashing in open fields. It was this constant struggle, a chess match with raids and counter-raids.
And the Meigs Raid shows how effective those smaller operations could be. They disrupted British plans, boosted American morale, and just generally caused a lot of trouble for the enemy.
It reminds us that wars aren't just won on the battlefield. They're won through a combination of strategies, big and small.
Exactly. It's about taking advantage of opportunities, being bold, and keeping the pressure on. And the Meigs Raid, it had all of that.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Meigs Raid, what's the big takeaway for you? What's the aha moment that we can leave our listeners with?
I think for me, it's realizing just how interconnected everything was during the Revolutionary War. It wasn't just a series of big battles with clear winners and losers. It was this constant back and forth, this web of actions and reactions. And even something like the Meigs Raid, this seemingly small event, could have ripple effects that lasted for years.
That's a great point. It really challenges us to think about history in a more nuanced way. And it raises some interesting questions, too. Like, how do these acts of disruption, even on a smaller scale, influence the course of a larger conflict? And are there parallels to be drawn with other historical events or even contemporary situations? I think those are questions worth pondering.
Absolutely. It's all about seeing those connections, understanding how even the seemingly small actions can have a big impact. And that's what makes history so fascinating, right?
I couldn't agree more.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, as always. Until next time.